Okay. So, what I felt prompted to talk about today is meditation, but a little bit different perspective on it. Specifically, what does the Bible say about meditation? And a particular verse that I'm going to focus on today is Psalm 1, and it was written somewhere around 3,000 years ago, giving us a perspective on what is meditation exactly. There's different views and perspectives and styles and techniques when it comes to meditation, but this is some guidance from 3,000 years ago from David, who was a incredible practitioner when it comes to meditation. And this is him talking about what is it, what are the benefits of it, and how do we do it? So, in very poetic Hebrew language. So that's what I want to explore today, because meditation is a pretty central part of our program. But what does that mean exactly? There's mindfulness meditation, there's transcendental meditation, there's different forms of meditation with different areas of focus. What is the biblical perspective on it? And what can we glean from that? And is there anything that we want to add to our practice of meditation? So this is Psalm chapter 1, and it says, very first word that stands out is the word blessed. So we're going to highlight that in just a moment. Blessed is the person who learns to meditate day and night on God's truth. So blessed is the person who learns to meditate. What do they meditate on? They meditate day and night, so it's consistently, on God's truth. And then it talks about the benefits. They are like a tree that's planted along streams of water. They bear fruit every season. Their leaves never wither, and they are prosperous in everything that they do. So let's unpack that for a moment. And the very first thing that stands out to me in that verse is the word blessed. And that's not a word that we use a lot in the English language. So it's much more packed with meaning when we look at what did it mean in the original Hebrew when David wrote this. So the word blessed, what it means is total fulfillment and complete well-being. And we don't think that way when we hear the word blessed. It's the opposite of cursed. So complete well-being, wholeness, total fulfillment, not lacking anything, just feeling completely satisfied. So total fulfillment, complete well-being, this is what the benefit is for someone who learns to meditate on God's truth. They have total fulfillment, they lack nothing, they're satisfied, and they have complete well-being. So what a promise that comes to a person who learns to meditate on God's truth. Now, the word meditate in the Hebrew, it's an interesting word picture. One of the meanings of it is a cow chewing its cud. That cow is meditating on the grass. They are actively chewing on it and getting all the nutrients out of it. It's a process. It's not a bite. It's a long, active engagement with the food to derive all nourishment that the cow can from. That's the concept of meditation. It's to ponder something very deeply. It's to actively engage with some subject. And it usually involves some kind of vocalization. And that's really interesting in the Hebrew. And that vocalization, that articulation, can be internal or external. But you're speaking it, either inside yourself or out loud. You're repeating it over and over. You're communing or connecting with the subject. You're declaring it, and you're attending to it very carefully. So in the biblical perspective, meditation is not about emptying the mind. It's quite the opposite. It's filling the mind. What are you filling it with? The nourishment of God's truth. You're chewing on it over and over and over again, getting everything you can out of it. That's the word picture of meditation. So this verse that talks about meditation, David says there's a couple of benefits, or what we're going to call promises. If we learn to meditate on God's word, there are some promises that will be ours. And the first one is we will be a person of substance. It says that the person who learns to meditate is like a tree. They are solid. They are not hollow. They have substance. And if I think about my life during my active addiction, I was not a person of substance. I had a facade. There was incredible hypocrisy. There was this dual existence, this Jekyll and Hyde, this compartmentalized, disintegrated life that I was living. I was a shallow person. I was not a person of substance. But the person who learns to meditate specifically on God's truth, they are blessed. They have total fulfillment, complete well-being, and they're a person of substance. There's no hypocrisy, no facade, no mask. They're not shallow. They are like a tree. They are solid. They're present. They're a person of integrity. That's the first promise, as a person of substance. The second one that he talks about is that there'll be stability. He says that a person who learns to meditate on God's truth is not just a person who's like a tree, but they're like a tree that is rooted by a stream. So other trees, they are dependent upon rain, and they can't handle the dry season if there's no rain. In Texas, I know in California and other parts of the country, they've had some really huge problems with dry seasons. And it's created all these hazards for wildfires and things like that. A tree that is planted by a stream has direct access to stability. They don't depend on the rain. They're not dependent upon the external environment. Their roots are going deep into the source of water. So they have stability. It reminds me of a quote from Elizabeth Elliot. She said, "Joy is not the absence of trouble, it's the presence of God." I'll repeat that because I love that so much. Joy is not the absence of trouble. Joy is the presence of God in the midst of our trouble. So the dry seasons can come, the hardships can come, the droughts can come in our life. But if we're a person who has learned to meditate, to chew on, to have direct access to God's truth and draw up the nourishment from that, we have this sense of stability that another tree wouldn't have. So we're not blown around by the environment. Our roots go deep. The third benefit David talks about for a person who learns to meditate is there is growth. This person is going to bear fruit every season. And every season, the fruit is going to be more productive. There's going to be more fruit. It's going to be juicier fruit. It's going to be bigger fruit. Every harvest, there's more fruit than the previous harvest. This person is growing. It doesn't mean that everything goes well in your life. That's not what this promise is. It doesn't mean that there's no droughts. It doesn't mean that you're always successful in everything you do. It means that you're growing even during the droughts. That you'll go through a winter where there's no fruit, but your roots are still deep and directly accessing the source of water. And that in the right time, you will bear even more fruit than last harvest. That's the picture this is painting for us. So David is saying, blessed is the person. They are totally fulfilled. They are completely whole. If a person learns to meditate, they learn to ponder, they learn to actively engage. They declare, they articulate internally and externally. They chew on God's truth. When they learn to do that, this is going to be a person of substance. This is a person of stability. This is a person that's going to grow even during the hard times. So if we look at this picture, what he's saying is it's a person who learns to meditate on truth in particular. That's what the water represents. The water in this picture represents truth. And when we learn to meditate on that, we're going to bear fruit. We're going to grow. There's going to be a harvest because that tree is drawing from its roots on streams of water, and meditation is drawing God's truth up into yourself. So there's one caveat here. This doesn't work unless you see his word as truth. If you see it as an opinion, it doesn't have the power. If you see it as a theory, it's not going to bring blessing and these promises to you. But if I see his truth as God is the author of these words, he's the author of my life, he's the author of my story, he is my creator, he spoke me into existence, if he's the author of my life and he's the author of truth and he's the author of these words, then that makes him the final authority in my life. Do you see that? If he's the author, he's the authority. If he's not the author, then he doesn't have authority in my life. Otherwise, if I don't see him as the author and this is his truth and he is the authority, then this really doesn't transform me. It doesn't change me. It's just another opinion out there. I won't really believe when God's truth says that he loves me. I won't really believe it unless I take him as the authority. I won't really believe that I am forgiven unless I believe that he has the final authority. Here's what we often do. We make someone else the authority in our life, and they determine our identity, and they determine our value. And what they say and what they do is the authority in our life. Often it's our partner. And so if they say kind things to us, we feel good about ourselves. We have a secure identity. But if they say unkind things to us, our identity is threatened because we've made them the final authority of who we are and our value and our worth. And so if they love us, we feel loved. If they are unloving towards us, we question our lovability. If they forgive us, we feel forgiven. If they don't forgive us, we feel guilty and ashamed and unforgiven. We have, by nature, made them the final authority of our value, our worth, and our identity. We've made them the truth. Does that make sense? And so what we're talking about here is, yes, the opinion of others matters and our own opinion matters, but who's the final authority in our life? And do we meditate on that? Do we take it as true? And if that authority says you are intensely loved and immensely valuable and you are totally forgiven, and we believe that is true, there's no room for shame because we meditate on that anytime shame shows up for us. Because shame is a lie. Shame is the anti-truth. Shame will tell us we're not lovable and we're not forgiven. That's the enemy. Are we making that the authority in our life? Are we making our own self-talk the authority in our life? Are we making the responses and behavior and words of our partner the final authority in our life? When we make God and his truth the final authority and we meditate on that, we are blessed. No matter if there's a drought, no matter what someone may say or do that hurts us, it doesn't threaten our identity or our security. It doesn't bring us into shame because that other person is not the final authority on our identity and value. So that's what we're getting at here. This only works if we take his truth as the authority in our life. This is how I finally became shame resilient, is that I took about 30-something verses that talk about how God sees me and how he loves me and how he created me and how he's forgiven me and how he's adopted me. And I meditated on those verses when I started true recovery for 6 weeks every day until I believed it. And I adopted a new identity that was not based on what other people think or my performance or what I think. I made God and his truth the final authority in my life, and what he says determines how I feel about myself, who I am, my level of forgiveness, my worthiness, my lovability. His words are the truth, not my own self-talk, not what others say and do. So the result is, when we meditate on truth, we bear fruit. And in other words, this tree is not a pipe. If it was a pipe, what would happen? It would bring up water from one end, and what would come out the other end? More water. But that's not how this works. Meditation is taking the word, the truth, and making it flesh. It's a transformation. In other words, this is a theory, this is a principle, this is a reality. We take a concept and it becomes real for us. That's what meditation does. You become whatever you meditate on. Whatever you meditate on, that's what you become. What did I used to meditate on? In a very well way, this is what I meditated on. Porn. That was my meditation. That's what I actively engaged with day and night, consistently. That's what I pondered. That's what I absorbed into me. That's what I internalized. That's what I attended to carefully. That was the subject that I was actively engaged with on a consistent basis for years. It was my meditation. It's what I chewed on. It's what I focused on. You become whatever you meditate on. So what did it lead to in my life? Well, just the opposite of these promises. It led to me being extremely shallow and empty and not a person of substance, not solid at all. It led to my life being unstable, not stable. Here's what I did to my addiction. In fact, this is my new simple definition of addiction. This is my current definition of addiction. It is escaping from a present, unpleasant reality. So anytime the storm came, anytime there was a drought, anytime there was something unpleasant, I was so unstable that I escaped that present, unpleasant reality. And that reality can be a person, it could be an emotion, it could be a situation. But I escaped. I had no stability. I was knocked around by the circumstances of life. And my only mode was escape. Not facing reality, but escaping from reality. And then the third thing I experienced in my former meditation of porn was I was completely immature. There was no growth. I stopped developing when I started my addiction. And so I was a boy in a very real way. I was functioning like a 12-year-old, emotionally, mature-wise, spiritually. My life wasn't marked by growth because what I was meditating on was what I was becoming. And so I was shallow, I was unstable, and I was immature. Real men don't look at porn. It's boys that look at porn. Boys who can shave. That's what I was. By appearance, I look like a man. But emotionally and spiritually and in every domain, I was functioning like a 12-year-old. No growth. Immature. So what happens? Jesus meets a woman at the well. Do you remember that story? We looked at that a few weeks ago. She's drawing water. And he says, wouldn't it be nice if you could find a source of water and you never thirsted again? What was he talking about? He was talking about this. And she said, I would love to have that water, but where would we find it? He said, you're looking at it. It's me. Because the truth or the word is a person. He's saying, I am the water. I'm the living water. Those who drink from me, they never thirst again. What's he saying? They're blessed. They're totally fulfilled. They're completely whole. They're a person of substance, stability, and they grow and they bear fruit. And they're not dependent upon the rain or the drought or the seasons of life or the environment. They get their nourishment, they get their identity from me. I'm the final authority. And what I say, when they believe it, they meditate on it, and they take it as truth, that word becomes flesh in their life.